Brian Schottenheimer told us exactly what the Dallas Cowboys are going to do in round one of the 2025 NFL draft. We'll tell you what next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on X at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on X at McCoolBCB. And Landon, Brian Schottenheimer, spoke at the owners' meeting on Tuesday. And he had some really interesting quotes, talked about a lot of different stuff. Before we even get into some of the stuff that he talked about, he's a very good speaker. And you can just tell that he has everything in control. And I know this sounds really weird, but he sounds like what a head coach should sound like. And I do think, weirdly, that matters.
Yeah, and this is kind of, I'm hoping that as more and more folks get the opportunity to see him, they've had his interviews up on DallasCowboys.com, but I don't know that everybody watches the offensive coordinator interview weekly. But I think as he's being exposed to more and more folks, just through media availability and that sort of thing, everyone's starting to get a good glimpse at exactly why he was able to kind of corral this job a little bit, right? There's something to the guy, right? Just like his dad in a lot of ways. There's something to him that it draws you to him. And he's, I think, we were talking about it before the show, right? He's a very good explainer. Like, he's very good at breaking down complicated concepts and then explaining to you like why they're important and kind of getting to the nitty gritty of it. And I think that kind of quote that he did about the, essentially what he was basically talking about was the money five positions, right? Like the positions that you pay money to because they are isolated on the field most often require the highest level of skill, right? So you pay for that. And he did a really great job of just kind of breaking that whole process down and explaining why they do that. I mean, it's for us, we've been like, Bill Walsh said that these guys are the most valuable guys, so that we call them the money five, and this is who you should draft. And he does a really great job of, actually explaining the nitty gritty of the why behind all of that. So, and just to kind of, obviously the point of what he said is important, but to your larger point, it does kind of show you a little bit of insight into why he could potentially be a very good coach, because he is good at breaking down difficult concepts into bite-sized morsels that are easy to consume.
So he was asked about what the Dallas Cowboys are going to do with the number 12 pick. And here is part of his answer. Yeah. You are looking for guys that influence the game. How do you influence the game? You rush the quarterback and you get sacks. You score touchdowns. You build it from the outside in. So you've got corners, receivers, they get isolated one-on-one. Pass rushers, tackles, they get isolated one-on-one. And then obviously the quarterback. Build it based on guys that get isolated a lot, because when you're isolated and can't help, it's a pretty daunting task. First of all, that clip made the rounds on social media today as everybody was talking about how you're supposed to build your roster from the inside out, build your trenches, and then worry about other stuff. I know that's a common theme. It's also a little bit of a misconception. Like, you have to have wide receivers and corners. And he's not saying ignore offensive line. He's literally saying tackles and pass rushers. All he's just doing is telling you what the money five position. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, and look, those aren't competing ideas. That's not that's not dissonance, right? Like, you can prioritize. In fact, if anything, what he's showing you is that the reason that that position individually is more valuable is because you operate as an individual, right? The collective offensive line, the unit offensive line, is more valuable than any one of those single positions. But I think that's you're not drafting an offensive line with the 12th pick. You're drafting an individual player.
Which and he also mentioned, like, we don't want to be picking as high as 12 again. Like, we got to make sure we get this right, so we're not drafting at this spot. It is as important as guards and centers and defensive tackles are. those aren't necessarily the positions that make it so you're not drafting at that spot ever again.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated subject, right? But it's not as simple and straightforward as you know, asset allocation is not the same thing as overall team building strategy, right? Like I think that there's a reason that you assign and allocate more money to those individuals than you might, an individual guard. But that doesn't mean that having the front of your pocket is less important
Of
than having
course not.
cornerback too. It's like it just those things are a little bit, kind of apples to oranges comparison a little bit. So, but back to the conversation, I do think that it does show you that that Money 5 positions clearly have a priority, as they should, because of the value of those positions, and we've talked about the cost analysis of making sure that you're getting. You're locking in low cost contracts for high end players at those positions, and those Money 5 positions are where that cost savings is even greatly increased because those players are so expensive normally. I do think that it doesn't really move the needle much, though. It's because
it does for me a little bit, because here's why. He didn't mention running back at all during his minute and a half answer, right?
Okay.
And there have been a lot of mock drafters, including Mel Kiper Jr. and Daniel Jeremiah, that have been mocking Omari and Hampton to Dallas at 12. I just don't. Nothing from Schottenheimer's answer tells me that they're leading that way at all.
Yeah, and I guess in that sense, if you thought that that running back was very much still a pick at 12, and I guess there's always that shot. It just hadn't felt like they've been talking about that. It felt like everyone else had been talking about running back at 12 for the Cowboys. But yeah, maybe this even further shuts the door on that a little bit, and just saying, hey, yeah, running back is a position that we're interested in, because I think Steven talked about it the other day. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go at 12. I mean, certainly with the depth of this class, you probably shouldn't go at 12. So it does indicate that maybe they aren't necessarily leaning that way at 12 for a running back.
The other thing that's interesting to me is that Brian Schottenheimer is an offensive guy, right? He's an offensive coordinator. That's the side of the ball he's worked on his entire life. The first position that he mentions is pass rusher, right? And again, I don't want to read into these quotes too much, but the Cowboys have an obvious need at pass rusher, opposite of Micah Parsons. If you remember, I always try to take notes as we're going on to see like where we're trending with these picks. If you go back to like early February, one of the names that was mentioned in connection with the Cowboys a lot was Mykel Williams from Georgia.
That's right.
And I'm wondering if that name's cooled off a little bit, but I'm wondering if he's back in the discussion as a potential option for the Cowboys at 12.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that any of these kind of first round defensive ends are probably in consideration. The thing about the draft cycle is that we go through phases, right? Like it's so long that we talk about a guy for a little while, and
you draft fatigue a little bit, right?
Yeah, and then you kind of move on, and then you like talk about somebody else. So as we get closer and closer to the draft, it's probably good to start trying to revisit some of the names that we talked about earlier. I think the fact that he brought up defensive end is a pretty strong indication that Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart, and I mean, I don't know if Mike Green's is a guy that they would be interested in as much, but
maybe not.
Those guys are probably in play here. Obviously that those were guys that were always in play here, to be honest. So it's really, that's the thing that's interesting about the draft cycle, is that it's really us that moves, right? It's like, we talk about like the players going up and down, but really it's just our opinions that are kind of constantly moving up and down as we're all watching tape. So I think probably for NFL teams, these kind of high upside defensive ends have always been kind of penciled in at the top half of the first round.
And I have my issues with Mykel Williams as a prospect, but some of the things that we've heard recently and from a lot of different sources is that, he's a really good run defender. He had a 1.60 10-yard split, which is incredible for someone of his size. Really good run defender, loves football, hard worker, young. I don't think there's any football IQ questions. And while maybe that guy doesn't have the upside that you're searching for at 12, I just wonder if they're going to look at somebody like Mykel Williams, and again, maybe it's a different guy, being like, you know what, this is what we need. He fits the best player available. He's a pretty clean prospect overall. That's our pick at 12.
Yeah, and I think that there are guys like this that, Burden falls into this category in some ways too, where a lot of hype going into the 2024 season, and then circumstance happens and you don't quite live up to that hype, but that doesn't mean that you aren't still that exciting player from 2023. And I think Williams certainly was that. I think Williams' tape in 2023 was better than his tape in 2024. It sounds like he was playing through an injury. That's something that we kind of got word on late. I think maybe even at the combine, if I'm not mistaken. So that kind of properly contextualizes some of his 24 tapes. So that's something to consider there. I think it's better to when you aren't sure about some of these guys, go back and watch a little bit more, go back to some older tape and see if there's some context. Guys like Mykel Williams, they kind of slip and fall, even though they were highly recruited, touted prospects going into the 24 season.
So I think Mykel Williams is on the short list of names that the Cowboys are going to consider at 12. But I don't know if he's the favorite. I'll tell you who I think it is next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start actually building your wealth. I've been using Monarch Money for at least 3 months now. And I can't tell you how much food or how much money I was wasting on food and football cards and just nonsense. But now I am budgeting smarter and I'm saving more. It's so easy to track your money and manage your money on the Monarch Money app. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to take control of your finances at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing some of the comments that head coach Brian Schottenheimer made at the NFL owners meeting. And I want to talk about what he was asked about the wide receiver 2 position. And the first thing he said, Landon, was along with adding more pieces, which they're trying to do, it's our job to be a developmental staff. He specifically named Ryan Flournoy and then Jonathan Mingo, and how they've been putting in basically off-season improvement plans to help them get better. So it seems like they are protecting themselves in case they can't get a receiver in the draft. But I just thought it was interesting that Flournoy was actually the first name out of his mouth, not Jalen Tolbert, not Mingo, not anybody else.
Well, they're going alphabetically, by last name. So there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think these are all guys that it feels like, and this is kind of what we were talking about before, right? These are all guys that they have investments in, right? 4th round picks across the board, right? Jalen Tolbert was a 4th round pick,
a 3rd round pick, right?
3rd round pick. Okay, yeah. Mingo was a 4th round trade for, and then obviously, they have a couple other guys too that they're kind of developing as well. But those are the 2 kind of big body guys, I would say. Well, and Tolbert as well. I mean, Mingo, Tolbert, and Flournoy are the 3 kind of bigger body guys that they're trying to develop, right? And those are all very similar body types, it seems like, right? They're all kind of a little bit bigger. I think that if you wanted to, Tolbert could play a little bit more of a kind of a flanker role, and he has. But I do think that, with Flournoy, he seems like an X. Mingo with his big body certainly can be a little bit of everything, but I think as an X mostly. And those are guys that you're trying to develop to be part of a committee of wide receivers, right? You're hoping that one of them takes a really big leap and finds something and develops something, and so that he kind of separates himself out of that group. But I think that all of that is still separate from what the Cowboys are trying to do with the wide receiver 2 position, right? Like, they're developing these other guys with hopes that they can fill in, they can play the X,
Well, I also think like they could. I don't think they're going to sign Jalen Tolbert to a contract extension after this year or during this year, right? So they're probably trying to figure out like who can be the 3rd receiver between Mingo and Flournoy a year from now, right?
Yeah. And just like, I mean, I think just generally developing and hoping that, maybe one of them really takes a huge leap and suddenly you've got something. But yeah, I mean, I do think that they're kind of developing these guys, not necessarily as, oh, okay, these are the other two guys that are going to be, opposite of CD Lamb. I think it's more like you're generally developing these guys. You're going to probably still add a talented body on top of all of these guys, in the draft or, at some point. And then you're going to get into training camp and sort it all out, right? And figure out exactly who's in what spot, and who's going to be in what formations, that sort of thing. Are they going to be playing as many three wide receiver sets? Are they going to be playing more two wide receiver sets? Do you want a different set of wide receivers out on the field when you're in 12 personnel than you would in 11 personnel? That's the kind of thing that you may kind of look at when you've got some of these kind of down roster rotational wide receiver 3 and 4 types. So those are all the things that they're going to try to develop. And like you said, maybe, you hope Flournoy has an incredible offseason. It turns on and suddenly you've got your starting X receiver and you just need a speed flanker to kind of, fill this roster, this starting 3 out.
Well, and that's the most interesting part of this Schottenheimer interview. He was talking about what they need to add on the outside from what they already have in the roster, and he said someone with speed, right? Combine that with Stephen Jones on Monday saying, we really like our room. At the same time, losing Brandon Cooks in free agency, we're still open to looking for a really explosive number 2 that could be an upgrade for us. I love Tetero McMillan from Arizona. I think he's an awesome player. I think he's going to be a 1,200-yard receiver in the NFL. But explosive is not one of the words I would use to describe him. I think I think Luther Burden's the best receiver in the class. So I think Tet is the second best receiver, but I don't think that's who they were talking about with that selection, Landon.
No, and this whole thing just makes me think that, man, we need to probably have Matt Waldman on the show at some point, right? Like considering what he kind of came up with the RSP and some of these receivers. I think. Listen, I think your ears must have been thrilled when you heard that, because I do feel like the chances of Luther Burden being the pick, maybe not at 12 but maybe at 12.
I don't think it's Luther Burden. Honestly, I don't know. I don't think
Golden?
Luther Burden is a consideration at all.
I wouldn't be shocked if he was considered, like, if he fell to them at 44,
Yeah, but I'm saying at 12. I don't think
at 12 it may be too rich, but maybe not. Who knows?
I mean, it's not rich for me, but to me, the whole time when they were talking, when Steven and Shottenheimer were talking, I think they must really like Matthew Golden, the receiver.
That's
from
probably
Texas.
it. Yeah, I mean, it does look, when we did the wide receiver stuff. One of the things we talked about is that Tet was our wide receiver. We both thought that he was wide receiver 1 in this class, outside of Travis Hunter, who's a different thing. But that Golden was a much better fit for what the Cowboys need, right? Like, just as far as body type, the old adage of, not that old, but the adage of trying to build a basketball team with your wide receiver room. I think you're still missing the speedy point guard type, right? That's what you need, is that wide receiver 2 who can take the top off, who can be dynamic. And it was kind of, I think that was the first thing that came to my mind when I heard Steven and then Schottenheimer say that, is, okay, good. They see it like we do, is that they still need a dynamic pass catcher on the outside. So I think it probably portends a preference for Matthew Golden over Ted McMillan. And I think that even if they don't get that type of player in round 1, there's still several.
Yeah,
Jalen Knoll is a guy who kind of fits that.
it's true. So I saw Todd McShay last night. He was showing the FanDuel NFL draft props, which FanDuel released. And he was basically telling everybody to go out and bet on Matthew Golden to be the first receiver drafted in this classic. He feels very, very strongly that Golden is going to be the first receiver off the board. We've seen Golden mocked to the Cowboys at several other outlets. I'm wondering if somebody knows that's who Dallas really likes, and that's kind of where we're trending. Well, we should have a conversation about Matthew Golden fitting in with this team, but if you're looking for a number 2 receiver that can play in the slot, that can play as a Z receiver, maybe give you some X reps every once in a while, but gets open and has a speed element to their game. I don't know if there's another receiver in this class that fits as well as Matthew Golden.
Yeah, it's a nice fit. You certainly, there's some aspects about the player that you certainly wish are better, but you're picking at 12, right? And I think for picking at 12, he's a really good fit for what you're looking for.
I disagree, but that's all right. It's for a different time. Let's talk about a big rule change that went into effect on Tuesday that's going to help turn a certain player on the Cowboys into a superstar. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets at the end of the tournament. I've got my eye on Auburn. I know they're number 1 seed. We've got all number 1 seeds this year, but I'm picking them to win the tournament. And FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something fun and exciting to bet on. Plus, the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, so one of the big news items that came out of the owners' meeting on Tuesday is that they officially passed the new kickoff rules, which were the same rules as last year. The only difference being touchbacks now come out to the 35 rather than the 30, with the idea that the NFL wants to increase returns. This is great news for the Dallas Cowboys and KaVontae Turpin, right?
Yeah, I mean, like we've been saying, it's kind of a cheat code when the guy who's signing your all-pro kick returner and punt returner is also one of the guys who has a vote on where the kickoff returns are going to be moved to. So, yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, obviously the NFL is making a push to try to promote even more returns in the game. And I think that this is a great way to do it. I mean, teams are not going to want to give offenses the opportunity to basically make, like you and I discussed, a first down and a half before they're in a field goal range. Maybe not even that, depending on who your kicker is.
17 yards, right?
Yeah. So I do think that it changes a lot of the. It's one of those things, and you and I had a very long conversation about this whole process. Honestly, it's one of those things where it feels like it's just a subtle change, but the cascading butterfly effect of all the other things that it may kind of trickle down to is fascinating, right? Like the way teams may want to play more aggressive on defense since there may not be as much of an appeal in bend don't break defense, since you're a first down and a half closer to scoring every single drive now than you were previously, right? I think that it's going to change a ton of the angles, but I think, specifically just to talk about the Cowboys angles, the most immediate ones is you're going to have your all-pro kick returner given, I mean, maybe even twice as much opportunity to return the ball as he did previously.
Even more. So he had 27 returns last year. Teams, I'm looking at my notes right here. Teams average a touchback on 64% of their kickoffs last year for the Cowboys, right? They were basically booming the ball out of the back of the end zone, so Turpin had no chance. There's just no way that teams are going to want Dallas starting at their 35 every single time, and they're going to chance it. They're going to hope for a holding penalty. They're going to hope to stop Turpin at the 24-yard line, right? I wouldn't be surprised if we see Turpin get to like 52, 55 returns. And if he's going to continue to average what he did last year, 33.5 yards per return, oh boy, we're in for quite a show.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think there's I think as the number of these increase, like the chances of scoring increase as well, not just because of proportional, but because the more you do these throughout the season, and actually are fully having to run down and make plays and make tackles, I think these kickoff teams are going to get a lot more exhausted than they were previously. Keeping in mind, they're not having to run nearly as much as they were before. Like it is still like them standing and waiting. But I do think that as you do more and more of these, it still is going to provide more and more opportunities for a guy like Turpin to break a big one. So,
well, and I wonder part of the reason the Cowboys gave Turpin the contract extension is they just know that his usage is going to go way up. So they're comfortable paying him more money, knowing he's going to handle twice as many kickoffs as he did last year. That's a big deal. And if he can continue to average what he's averaged over the last couple of years, I think it was 29.9 in 2023 and then a 33.3 in 2024. I mean, you're looking at starting with advantageous field position on almost every single kickoff or after, starting every drive. Offense is a lot easier if you only need to go 22 yards to be in field goal range, right?
Yeah, and then on top of that, you're starting to see more of him being used as in the offense as well, which I think was also part of the reason they felt pretty good about giving him that money, is that he's obviously going to be used, like you said, potentially twice as much more on kickoff returns, and then now also on top of that, you feel like you're adding in maybe a little bit of a larger share on offense as well. That ends up looking like a really great contract for a guy who you hope is going to provide a lot of big plays in the next coming years.
I'm fascinated to see what teams do. Like early into the season, do they just boom the ball out of the back of the end zone as they kind of try to figure out their special teams units, or do they dare put the ball in the hands of Turpin, who we've seen can be an absolute game changer? I don't know. It's all I know is that KaVontae Turpin's got to be smiling ear to ear all off season long because number one, he got a contract, and number two, he's just going to be a way bigger part of the team than he ever before.
I wouldn't be shocked if we got to the end of the 2025 season and we looked back and there was like a big boom in scoring early in the season, simply as teams are trying to kind of calculate the pros and cons of kicking it back through the end zone. I wouldn't be shocked that some teams decide to continue to try to just kick it through the end zone. And then as teams start to score more because they're closer, they're like, okay, let's back off a little bit. Let's adjust and maybe, or it could be the other way. Maybe it's the other way. So it'll be interesting to see exactly, like, as teams kind of adjust to the rule, how they sort of kind of feel that out.
And the last thing I wanted to say before we head out is I wonder if the Cowboys are going to start prioritizing some guys, not early, but like on day 3 that can help as returners, because maybe teams are just going to try to kick away from Turpin. And I'm not even sure who the backup kick returner would be at this point. I mean, I don't think it's any of the other receivers, right? So, they don't have a running back on their roster that can handle it. I wonder if
Vaughn makes the team, which I don't know if he will, but he's the only other one I know that has return history, right?
I don't know if I want Deuce Vaughn.
That's fair.
Well, this is where, again, we could make a whole show out of this. This is where I won't be surprised if they double up on running backs, because there are so many running backs that are going to be available in that 4th, 5th, 6th round range that maybe aren't quite good enough to be starters, but have a lot of return ability. Like I'm thinking of Brashad Smith from SMU, the former receiver who's moved to running back, has kick return experience. That seems like the perfect guy to me to spend a 5th round pick on, have him be your backup kick returner and like your number 3 running back as a rookie. I bet you Dallas does something like that.
And again, as we've discussed previously, with the new change of the rules, the kind of Mike McCarthy's talked about it, the change in body types that play on special teams. Don't be surprised if also later you're seeing more drafting of tight ends and linebackers just to kind of fill out the body types that you need to facilitate these special teams, especially now that you're going to be expecting more returns. You're going to need more bodies that can be reliable tacklers in space and can handle it's kind of a difficult assignment to be on that kickoff team, have no momentum, and then just kind of get into it and try to chase down the likes of a Turpin. So you got to fill out those roles as well.
Somebody that has legit 4.3 speed and is lightning quick. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas is looking for another one of those guys to add to their roster at some point this offseason. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Make sure you download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Find us on YouTube as well. You can follow Landon on X at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.